My future wife was hiding the fact that she wanted to betray me. She cheated on me during our summer vacation. After the separation, she and I parted ways. Nathan sat in disbelief. His mind reeled as he listened to Leah complete her explanation. He could feel frustration and anger rising inside him. Every word she said made it worse. It had begun as a typical Saturday afternoon drive, one of their usual weekend outings. But everything seemed to be unraveling. They were on their way to the concert, which they had been looking forward to for several weeks. When Nathan casually mentioned taking a break together after Leah graduated from her college program, he had been thinking about it for some time. Imagine a quiet, peaceful getaway in the mountains, just the two of them, away from it all. However, Leah's response did not meet his expectations. "Nathan," Leah said, her voice soft but firm, "I already told you that I'm leaving with Sarah and Emma the day after graduation. We've had this trip planned for years. We plan to spend the entire summer traveling across the United States. We already set up and packed. Saved the entire thing." Nathan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, and his knuckles turned white. "You cannot be serious. I thought we had talked about this. You said we should focus on ourselves after graduation, not on an insane road trip with your friends. Whatever happened to that?" Leah turned to him, her expression calm but firm, as if she had anticipated this reaction. "Nathan, I have never agreed to cancel the trip. I've been planning this with him since we started college. We've saved every penny, worked extra hours, and made sacrifices to make this possible. You knew this was the plan all along. I thought we were getting past this." Nathan raised his voice, frustrated. "We've made a commitment. Leah, we're supposed to be focused on creating a life together. You can't simply run away for the entire summer with those two. What about us?" Leah's eyes narrowed slightly. Her patience is wearing thin. "Nathan, this isn't about us versus them. This is about a trip that I've been wanting to take for quite some time. I trusted you when you went on work retreats and spent weekends with your old college friends. You understand how much this trip means to me." Nathan shook his head, his anger growing. "You understand the difference. I went to those retreats for work, not to spend months partying with friends. Do you think I don't know how Sarah and Emma behave when they are away from home? They become wild, and you're spending the entire summer with them, drinking and partying. What do you think will happen?" Leah crossed her arms defensively. "Those are my best friends, Nathan. I won't let you talk about them that way. Besides, you're exaggerating the situation. We're just going to have some fun and explore new places, and then I'll get back to you. Nothing will change between us." Nathan's jaw tightened, his voice lowered, as he struggled to control his temper. "If you take this trip, everything will change. You may not see it now, but I do. If you spend the summer with them, things will be different when you return. Do you really believe we can pick up where we left off? Do you really care what this means for us?" Leah shook her head, exasperated. "Nathan, I love you. I'm not trying to break up with you, but I have to go on this trip. It's something I've always wanted to do, and I'm not going to cancel it just because you're worried about me being away for a few months." Nathan stared straight ahead, his gaze fixed on the road but his thoughts racing. He felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. Everything he thought they had together was unraveling in the course of the conversation. Nathan spoke firmly and steadily. "If you go on this trip, do not expect things to be the same when you return. If you select this, you are choosing them over me, over us." Leah's expression softened slightly, but she did not give in. "Nathan, you are being unfair. This isn't a choice between you and them. It's only a trip. I'll be back, and we can continue as we have always planned." Nathan drove into the concert venue parking lot. The silence between them was heavy and strained. The evening stretched before them. However, Nathan's excitement about the concert had faded. He could feel it, not developing in his stomach. Leah's words had a greater impact on him than he had anticipated. They parked and entered the concert hall, but Nathan's thoughts were elsewhere. The music, which he had been looking forward to all week, faded into the background as he replayed the conversation in his mind. He couldn't believe Leah was going on the trip, despite everything they had said about their future together after the concert. As they walked back to the car, Leah placed her hand in his. However, Nathan did not feel the usual warmth from the gesture. It was as if there was a wall between them now, one he couldn't quite break through. Are you really not going to change your mind? Nathan asked quietly as they approached the car. Leah sighed and pulled her hand away. Nathan, I have made my decision. This is something I need to do for myself. However, this does not imply that I do not love you. Nathan unlocked the car and climbed into the driver's seat. The silence was more deafening than the loudest song from the concert they'd just left. He started the engine but remained stationary. His mind is still racing. Let's just head home, Leah said softly, breaking the silence. Nathan did not respond. He shifted into gear and drove his thoughts into a tangle in order to formulate a response. He wasn't sure what to say. The knot in his stomach grew tighter as they approached her apartment. When they arrived, he parked outside her building instead of turning off the engine and walking her to the door, as he normally did. Nathan remained in the car. Leah unbuckled her seatbelt and looked at him expectantly. Aren't you coming in? She asked, her voice tentative. Nathan shakes his head. No, Leah, I am not coming in tonight. Leah blinked, surprised. Why not? What is going on, Nathan? We always spend the night together following these events. Nathan finally looked at her, his gaze hardened. I do not know, Leah. Perhaps I need some time to think. You've made your choice, and I need to figure out what it means for me. Leah furrowed her brow in confusion. Nathan, don't act like this. I told you that nothing is going to change between us. It's only a trip. Nathan's voice was calm, but the emotion behind it was obvious. That quote S where you go wrong, Leah. Everything has already changed. Leah opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Instead, she reached for the door handle, pausing briefly before exiting the car. Good night, Nathan, she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Nathan watched her approach the door of her building. His heart is heavy. He didn't move until she got inside, and then he sat there for a few minutes, staring at the dashboard. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had never been more uncertain about their future. When he finally pulled away from the curb and headed home, the engine's quiet hum seemed to amplify the surrounding silence. Regardless of what Leah said, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end, and the thought weighed on him more than he expected. Leah stood in her apartment, leaning against the door, which clicked shut behind her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and the tension from their conversation lingered in the air. She knew Nathan was upset, but she didn't understand why he was making such a big deal over this trip. She took a deep breath and entered the living room, where Sarah and Emma were waiting for her. Both of them were sprawled across the couch, glasses of wine in hand. Sarah raised an eyebrow when Leah walked in. Well? Sarah asked with a smirk on her lips. How do you take it? Leah shook her head, letting out a frustrated sigh and kicking off her shoes. Not well. He's mad. I do not know what to do. He acts as if I am abandoning him or something. Emma snorted and sipped her wine. Men always behave like this when they are not the center of attention. He will get over it. They always do. Leah flopped down on the couch next to them and ran her hands through her hair. I don't understand why he's so upset. It is not as if I am breaking up with him. It's only a trip. Sarah laughed. She reached for the bottle to refill her glass. Nathan has always been the jealous type. Leah, you are aware of this. He, probably worried that you'll have too much fun without him. Leah frowned and crossed her arms. I do not know, he said. If I go, things will not be the same when I return. I didn't think he would take it so seriously. Emma leaned forward and set her glass down on the coffee table. Look, you have been planning this trip for years. An opportunity of a lifetime. You can't back out now because your fiancé is having a minor meltdown. He will come around. He loves you too much not to. Leah stared at the ceiling. Her mind raced. She knew Emma was correct. They'd been planning this trip since their freshman year, and she'd been looking forward to it since she could remember. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this would change her and Nathan's relationship in unexpected ways. Do you think I'm being selfish? Leah asked quietly. more for herself than for her friends. Sarah and Emma shared a glance before Sarah spoke up. "Leah, this is your life. You cannot live it for someone else. If Nathan truly loves you, he will support you. If he can't handle a few months apart, he may not be the right guy for you after all." Leah chewed on her lower lip, thinking about her friend's words. She loved Nathan and didn't want to lose him, but she also couldn't give up on the dream she'd worked so hard to achieve. "I only hope he understands." Leah mumbled more to herself than anyone else. Nathan spent the next few days in a haze. He went about his daily routine of work, gym, and home, but his thoughts were constantly focused on Leah and the decision she had made. He hadn't spoken to her since that night, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared to. He knew she would be leaving soon. Every time he reflected on it, a knot of frustration and uncertainty formed in his chest. Part of him wanted to confront her and beg her to stay. But another part of him, one that was becoming louder by the day, told him that if she could just leave him like this, perhaps they weren't meant to be after all. On the morning of Leah's departure, Nathan found himself driving over to her apartment without thinking. He needed to see her and say goodbye before she left. Perhaps they can work things out, or at least find some resolution. When he arrived, the parking lot was almost empty, and he noticed Leah's car still in its usual spot. He parked nearby and sat in his truck for a moment, looking at the building. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew he couldn't let her leave without first speaking with her. He got out of the truck and approached the front door. His heart pounded in his chest. He knocked, and after a few moments Leah opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise to see him standing there. "Nathan." She spoke softly, stepping aside to allow him in. Nathan entered the apartment, scanning the surroundings. It was mostly packed, with boxes stacked near the door and a few suitcases sitting on the couch. It hit him, followed by the reality of her leaving. She was really going. "I just needed to see you before you leave." Nathan spoke, his voice strained. Leah nodded, her face sad. "I'm glad you arrived. I've also been wanting to talk to you." Nathan stared at her, his heart aching. "Will you really go through with this?" Leah sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "Nathan, I have to. This is something I have been wanting for a long time. It's not a choice between you and them. It's all about me and what I need right now." Nathan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions under control. "So what about us? What will happen when you get back? Do you really think everything will just go back to normal?" Leah's eyes welled with tears, and she shook her head. "I do not know, Nathan. I wish I could promise you that everything will be fine, but I cannot. All I know is that I need to leave." Nathan took a step forward, his voice breaking. "Leah, I love you. I do not want to lose you." Leah wiped away her tears, her voice trembling. "I love you, Nathan, but I have to do this." Nathan closed his eyes. The weight of her words crashed down on him. He knew there was nothing more he could say. Nothing would change her mind. He'd lost her, at least for now. "Goodbye, Leah," Nathan whispered, his heart breaking as he turned to walk out the door. Leah stood in the doorway, watching him exit. Tears were streaming down her face. She knew she was making the right decision for herself, but it didn't make things any easier. Nathan drove away from Leah's apartment, his heart heavy from their last conversation. He hoped that seeing her one last time would provide him with some clarity and closure. But all it did was confirm his fears. This marked the end. Regardless of what Leah said about their love and future, the fact that she could easily prioritize her trip over their relationship spoke volumes to him. He couldn't get over the feeling that this was the start of a long, painful separation. He tried to stay busy in the days that followed, throwing himself into his work and going to the gym more often than usual. Nothing could take his mind off Leah. He was reminded of her everywhere he went. Whether it was the song playing on the radio as he drove to work, or the empty side of his bed. That felt even colder now that she was truly gone. The silence inside his apartment was deafening. Nathan's friends tried to help in the ways they knew best, such as inviting him out for drinks or pressuring him to participate in their usual weekend activities. But every time he went out, he felt as if he was simply going through the motions. He laughed when he was supposed to, smiled at the jokes, but deep down, He felt hollow. Nathan and his friend Chris were sitting at the bar one evening, a few weeks after Leah had left. The two had known each other since college, and Chris was one of the few people Nathan confided in when his relationship with Leah began to deteriorate. Chris was the type of guy who didn't sugarcoat anything, which was exactly what Nathan needed right now. "So," Chris said, taking a long swig of his beer and turning to Nathan. "You've been moping around for weeks. It's time to snap out of it, man. You act as if the world is ending." Nathan sighed, swirling the ice in his glass before responding, "It feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, Leah and I were supposed to plan our futures together. Now she's off gallivanting across the country while I'm stuck in this mess." Chris shook his head and placed his beer on the bar with a thud. "Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. She has made her decision, and it is now up to you to make yours. You can't just sit around waiting for her to return, hoping that everything will magically fix itself. You have to decide what you want." Nathan stared at his drink as the words sank in. He realized Chris was correct, but it was easier said than done. What if she returns and everything is the same? What if we can work it out? Chris snorted and leaned back in his chair. "Man, you have to stop holding on to false hope." She left the unit. She prioritized herself and her friends over your relationship, even if she returns. Do you really think you'll be able to trust her as much as you used to? Relationships are built on trust, and I'm sorry to break it to you, but that is now shattered. Nathan ran his hand through his hair, frustration rising to the surface. "I understand. I just don't know what to do. I thought we had a future together." Chris slapped him on the back and offered a sympathetic smile. "We all think that at some point, but things don't always go as planned. You need to pick yourself up and move on. And who knows, maybe there is someone out there who is ready to build that future with you." Nathan wanted to believe Chris, but it still felt like a huge chunk of his life had been ripped away, leaving an emptiness that could never be filled. As the night progressed and the bar became more crowded, Nathan found himself fading into the background of his own existence, watching from a distance as everything went on without him. In contrast, Leah's summer adventure exceeded her expectations. She, Sarah, and Emma had packed Leah's car and hit the road as planned. They drove across the country, stopping in small towns, national parks, and cities that they had always wanted to see. They had waited years for this freedom, and they made the most of it. In the first few weeks, Leah attempted to stay in touch with Nathan. She would send him pictures from the places they visited, short messages about their adventures, as well as the occasional phone call when she had some quiet time. However, he responded quickly and coldly. She eventually stopped trying. As the weeks turned into months, Leah found herself thinking less about Nathan. The excitement of the trip, the new experiences, and the constant companionship of her friends consumed her days, leaving little room for reflection on what she had left behind. A part of her felt bad about how easily she had let go, but another part of her, the part that had always desired independence, felt liberated. Leah lay in her sleeping bag one night while camping under the stars in a Utah national park, gazing up at the clear, starry sky. Emma and Sarah were already asleep in their tents, but Leah couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. She had always desired this level of freedom, the ability to travel the world and live without restrictions. However, now that she had it, she was unsure whether it was everything she had hoped for. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her messages until she came across Nathan's name. Day. Her finger hovered over the screen, but she did not press send. What would she actually say? She missed him. She said she was sorry. She didn't know how she felt anymore. Instead, she turned off her phone and rolled onto her side, tightening the sleeping bag around her. The night air was cool, and crickets chirped in the silence. For the first time in weeks, Leah felt the weight of her decisions bear down on her at home. Nathan was slowly rebuilding his life without Leah. Following his conversation with Chris, he decided to take a step back and reconsider what he wanted. It wasn't easy, but he began making small changes, such as spending more time with friends, focusing on his career, and even taking up new hobbies to fill the void. One evening, as he was leaving the office, His coworker Lauren stopped him near the elevator. "Hello, Nathan," she said, smiling brightly. "A few of us are having dinner at the new restaurant down the street. Do you want to join us?" Nathan paused for a moment. He wasn't in the mood to socialize, but he also knew that isolating himself wouldn't be beneficial. "Sure, comma," he said, giving a small smile in response. "This sounds like fun." The coworkers ended up at a quaint little restaurant with outdoor seating. The evening air was warm and conversation flowed freely around the table. Nathan found himself laughing and engaging in conversation, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at ease. Lauren, who sat across from him, seemed to notice the change in his demeanor. "You seem more relaxed tonight," she said with a grin. "I'm glad you arrived." Nathan chuckled and took a sip from his drink. "Yeah, I've been a little out of it recently." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "A little? Try a lot. Everyone's been worried about you, but it's good to see you smiling again." Nathan smiled, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Lauren. I think all I needed was a reminder that life goes on." As the evening wore on, Nathan found himself enjoying Lauren's company more and more. They talked about everything from work to travel, and he realized just how easy it was to be around her. She had a way of making him forget about his problems, even if only for a little while. By the time the night ended, Nathan felt lighter than he had in weeks as he said goodbye to his coworkers and walked back to his car. He couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. Leah's road trip was winding down by the time August rolled around. She and her friends had seen everything they had set out to see and more. They had hiked in national parks, explored vibrant cities, and spent countless nights camping under the stars. It had been a whirlwind adventure, but now that the end was in sight, Leah found herself feeling a mix of emotions. She hadn't spoken to Nathan in weeks. At first, she had convinced herself that it was for the best, that they both needed space to figure things out. But as the days passed, the distance between them felt more like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. She wondered what he was doing, if he had moved on, or if he was waiting for her to come back. As they drove through the final stretch of their trip, Leah sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the landscape blurred by. Sarah and Emma were chatting in the front, their excitement about returning home palpable. But Leah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. What was she going to do when she got back? Could things with Nathan really go back to the way they were before? Nathan was at the gym one evening when he got a text from Leah. He hadn't heard from her in over a month, and seeing her name flash across the screen sent a jolt of emotions through him. He hesitated before opening the message. "Hey, Nathan, I'm coming back into town next week. I'd really like to talk when I get back." Nathan stared at the words, his heart racing. He had spent the last few weeks trying to move on, and now, out of the blue, Leah wanted to talk. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, to protect himself from whatever pain this conversation might bring. But another part of him, the part that still cared about her, needed closure. He typed out a response before he could second-guess himself. "Sure. Let me know when you're back." When Leah returned, the city felt different to her. As if everything had moved forward while she had been standing still. She had expected to feel relief at being home, but instead, she was filled with a sense of uncertainty. The trip had been everything she wanted yet. Now that it was over, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had lost something important along the way. The day she and Nathan planned to meet, Leah stood in front of her mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen him in months, and she wasn't sure what to expect. Would he be angry? Distant? Had he moved on? When she finally arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, Leah spotted Nathan sitting at a table by the window. He looked different, older, more confident, but there was still something familiar about him that tugged at her heart. "Nathan, she said softly as she approached the table. He looked up, his expression neutral as he stood to greet her. "Leah." They sat down, an awkward silence hanging between them. Leah didn't know where to start. The last time they had seen each other, everything had felt so final now. It was as if they were two strangers trying to figure out how to reconnect. "I quote, am glad you came," Leah said after a few moments. I wasn't sure if you would. Nathan shrugged his tone. Even you wanted to talk. So talk. Leah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I understand things did not go well between us before I left, and I apologize for how I handled everything. I should not have just left without discussing things with you. Nathan nodded but did not say anything. Leah kept her voice quieter now. The trip was everything I expected it to be, but I missed you. I missed us. Nathan's gaze was steady. Did you? Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't appear that you did. Leah grimaced. The truth of his words cut deep. I know it appeared that I didn't care, but I did. I only needed to do this to prove something to myself. Nathan finally leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. And what have you proven, Leah? Leah hesitated, unsure how to respond. I proved that I could do it, that I could function independently. But now I realize I don't want to do it without you. Nathan gave a bitter laugh. Well, Leah, you did it without me. You made your decision, and I've had to live with it. Leah's eyes welled up with tears, which she quickly blinked away. Nathan, I know I hurt you. I didn't want to, but I did. And I'm deeply sorry. Nathan sat back in his chair and crossed his arms. Leah, what do you want from me? Forgiveness. A second opportunity. Leah shakes her head. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I do not know. I just wanted to see you, to talk with you. I wanted to know if there was still something between us. Nathan remained silent for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice softer than usual. Leah, I'm not sure if I can ever trust you again. You left without looking back. You chose them over me. Over us. Leah's heart was shattered by his words, but she knew they were correct. She'd made her decision, and now she was dealing with the consequences. I understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. I just wanted to let you know that I still love you. Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness she had never witnessed before. I loved you too, Leah. However, love isn't always enough. The words hung between them like a final goodbye, and Leah felt the weight of them fall on her. She'd lost him, and there was no turning back. After a long pause, Nathan stood up and slid his chair back. Take care of yourself, Leah. Leah nodded, her throat too tight to talk. She watched him walk out of the cafe, and her heart broke all over again. She had always known that this day would arrive. But now that it was here, the reality was almost too much to handle. Leah sat there for a long time after Nathan had left her mind, replaying their conversation over and over. She'd made her decision, and now she had to live with it. Despite how painful it was, Leah knew it was the right thing to do. She needed to discover herself in order to demonstrate her independence. And, while it had cost her the man she loved, she knew she had learned from the experience. Life would continue, and so would she. Nathan walked away from the cafe. His heart felt heavy, but his mind was clear. He had finally found the closure he needed, and while it was painful to say goodbye to Leah, he knew it was the right thing to do. As he moved down the street, Nathan felt relief wash over him. The chapter with Leah had finally ended, and he could now focus on creating a new future for himself, one undefined by the past. Nathan had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt optimistic. That was enough. Nathan and Leah both took steps forward. Their paths no longer crossed. The pain of their separation would last for a while. However, they both understood that it was necessary for their development. Nathan walked out of the cafe that day, carrying an unfamiliar weight on his shoulders. The conversation with Leah had been painful, but cathartic in ways he hadn't expected. He had finally said everything he needed to say, the things that had been accumulating inside him for months. He had loved Leah deeply, but there was no turning back now. The past had shaped both of them, and they had grown apart. Still, the pain of letting her go felt more like a slow burn than the rage he had anticipated. He was exhausted from holding on to hope, which had now been released. He felt lighter, albeit only slightly,